I'm Millie Weaver, and you're watching the Millennial Millie Show. Well, red flag laws have been touted as the solution for mass shootings by leftists, as well as gun control. But it turns out that these red flag laws aren't quite the solution that Democrats have been wanting them to be. Well, the recent case that kind of exposes how these red flag laws don't really stop mass shootings has happened Springs, where a man walked into an LGBTQ nightclub called Q Club and began to open fire on people inside of this club. Well, it's a tragedy. It's sad to see many people lose their lives when these type of situations happen, but as we can see, red flag laws, taking away guns isn't necessarily going to stop these type of situations from happening. We see time and time again that the only thing that saves lives are good Samaritans, people taking action and stepping up, people essentially stopping these armed individuals when they decide to go in and take out whatever mental illness or problems they have on society. It's really when people step up and stop these things from happening, whether it be armed citizens or just citizens that decide to tackle gunmen like what happened in this instance. So this suspect, Anderson Lee Aldrich, 22 years old, is now facing 5 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of a bias-motivated crime causing bodily injury. Now, what's most concerning about this story and this situation is that Aldrich has had a criminal history essentially with I guess it wouldn't be right to say criminal history, but he has had a history with the local law enforcement because he essentially had this incident happen where his mother called the police on him because allegedly he was threatening to attack her with a homemade bomb, and also he threatened to attack her with guns and ammunition of some sort. So the police ended up getting into a standoff with this individual, and actually it resulted in a crisis unit having to be sent out, and um, many people in law enforcement. It was quite the ordeal, and as you can see by the article over here on the side, this image at the top here kind of shows a screen capture of the surveillance, the doorbell ring camera footage that showed him walking out of his home with his arms in the air. You can clearly see some of these police vehicles that are typically used for, I don't know, hostage situations or crisis situations. So clearly he was on the radar of law enforcement, but law enforcement failed to act. So law enforcement they did not end up prosecuting. So even though law enforcement might have written the report, when it got to the DA's office in the blue city now and the blue state, Colorado and Colorado Springs, the DA didn't want to press charges. That is what happens in many of these blue cities, right? We see people just going and robbing stores, committing all kinds of crimes in broad daylight. Many times they're not even arrested. You know, in some cities, they tell police, don't even arrest people unless they steal over a certain dollar amount, or don't even arrest shoplifters, right? But in many of these blue cities, they'll, they'll just release people right back into the street, even if they have been criminally charged, or they'll give them very light sentences. But in this instance, this guy, he wasn't even charged with anything. I mean, there are laws out there. He could have been charged with making terroristic threats. I mean, maybe domestic violence. I don't know the full situation, but he could have probably been charged with something. Okay. And so it just illustrates how, the policies that the Democrats always want to put forward is, you know, let's let criminals just do whatever, be very soft on sentencing, let these people go right back out in the streets to then reoffend. But then when they actually go do something really crazy, even though we've had all of these signs that they were likely to do something really crazy, then we're going to complain. And then we're going to tell law abiding citizens, we don't want you to have a gun because of crazy people out there that want to go shoot people up. Wherein The only time we've actually seen lives being saved in these mass shooting situations is when somebody who's armed steps up and protects others and themselves. Or they tackle the person. Maybe they're not armed, but they tackle them and they risk their lives, right? We've seen many cases of people being heroic and, even losing their lives, but they save other people's time. And so it's just in laws are the be it end all solution for these gun mass shooting incidents. And I think everyone has fear, right? They use our fear against us because nobody wants this to happen to themselves or to a family member they love. But at the same time, I mean, we have to actually come up with real solutions for these problems. And this is just another time when it really proves that the red flag laws are not real solutions. Okay. They're just simply not real solutions. So let's go ahead and look at this little clip here that really illustrates what red flags are supposed to do, right?
The red flag law, also known as the Extreme Risk Protection Order law, prevents individuals who show signs of being a threat to themselves or others from purchasing or possessing a firearm by allowing law enforcement or individuals in someone's life to intervene. While the laws differ by state, they allow those who intervene to petition a court for an order to temporarily prevent someone in crisis from accessing a gun. 19 states and Washington, D.C. have adopted this policy, and 14 of those laws were implemented after the 2018 school shooting.
Okay, so there you have it. I mean, clearly you could see that Colorado was selected there as one of the states that has enacted these red flag laws. Yet here we are today. There's another mass shooting. And so what is the response from Colorado Governor Hickenlooper? Well, his response is we need stricter red flag laws because the reason why these red flag laws didn't work is because they're not strict enough. I mean, this is just insane. Hickenlooper, I don't have any real facts about how the Colorado shooter got a gun, but we need to new level for red flag laws. Okay. So their solution is more red flag laws when the red flag laws aren't working. Okay, because that makes so much logical sense to just do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Cool, got it. Obviously, what we're doing right now is not stopping mass shootings in general as a society. But the reality is we might not be able to stop someone from wanting to go out there and commit harm to other people because there's a lot of mentally ill people out there. Which, hey, by the way, might be a good idea to reopen the mental health institutions that the Democrats all wanted to shut down. Yeah, I remember that when they closed up all the mental health institutions because they said patients' rights were being violated. Okay, sure. Yeah, they did find some instances where some patients' rights were being violated and they were doing some pretty non humane things to some of these patients in the mental institutes, but you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Do you say, well, then, all right, we'll just close down all the mental institutions and let everyone just go back out onto the streets? And in the sad reality, that is exactly what ended up happening. All it did was just displace a lot of mentally ill people, and now it's like we have the streets just, you know, full and filled with people who are in desperate need of mental health help or even rehabilitation from addiction and drugs. And so, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach this problem, right? But in no way do I see how just disarming the general law-abiding public is going to make anyone safer. You'd think that you'd want to encourage more people to carry, more people to take their own defense into their hands in order to, dissuade this type of behavior from people. And oftentimes, is it that the media is giving these shooters so much attention that they're doing it to become infamous, right? I mean, it might be some kind of a high or a drug or an adrenaline rush for some of these type of individuals to go from somebody who no one knows, who maybe they feel like they're nobody, to all of a sudden everyone's speaking their name. All the whole world is looking at them for a moment. So we have to really think about how we might be affecting people and influencing them to continue on, essentially to do copycat crimes, right? But what we don't need to be doing is we don't need to be doing what some of these MSNBC pundits, or I guess themselves reporters, are doing. Basically saying, look, we need to find out who this shooter watches for news. And then we need to say that those people are responsible, right? We need to say, oh, if this shooter watches Tucker Carlson, Tucker should be punished civilly. He should be sued. He should be gone after. As though that makes any sense at all, right? I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's like saying if there's a criminal out there that commits a crime, okay, let's look at the last movie that person watched, and then we can sue the movie producers. Or let's look at the last video game that person watched, and then let's sue the video game company. Let's look at the last, place he shopped at, and then sue the place I mean, this is ridiculous. Okay? The only person responsible for a mass shooting is the person who did the mass shooting. And anything else is just disingenuous. Okay? It's disingenuous. So let's go ahead and look at this clip here where this shameful MSNBC reporter tries to go after his competition and single out Tucker Carlson and other journalists that he doesn't like by saying that somehow they're responsible for this shooting.
Prosecutors and police, they found quickly what they needed. That means they know this was a bias crime. This is likely, and since we've heard reports that the subject isn't cooperating with police, that means they likely found clear and convincing evidence on his devices. If he's a consumer of the people we just rattled off, from Lauren Boebert to Tucker Carlson, let's get it out. Let's get it out at trial. Let's expose it for what it is, name it and shame it. He's a consumer of these people, and those people should face civil consequences from the victims. The other thing they want to deny is not only the safe harbor, but the way we resolve this. And by that, I mean, you asked earlier, how do we put a stop to hate? Well, one of the things you would normally do is teach young children in school, here's what race is about. Here's what these other people over here who may seem different to you, they have a different orientation. But you know what? Increasingly, states are saying, no, you can't talk about race or say the word gay or teach anything in school.
Okay, so how is that going to help anything? And if anyone should be ashamed, that reporter, alleged reporter, right? I'm not even gonna. I mean, is that really reporting what he's doing there? Him trying to shame like whoever this person watches as a news source. Wouldn't it be ironic if this person watches MSNBC as a news source and they're saying this? I mean, we don't really know. We don't know too much about the suspect right now, but I can guess that they're assuming that, right? So it's failed logic. It's shameful. They should be shameful for that. But if you want to talk about what might be fueling these things, although we don't know the motive, we don't know what this person's intentions are. There's been a lot of talk about that it's obvious, right, in some level that it was targeted at LGBTQ people because this was an LGBTQ nightclub, one of the only ones in Colorado Springs. And if that's the case, then yeah, I mean, the person should be charged with a hate crime. But then we also have to take some self accountability. We also have to say, okay, what do you think could be fueling this? What do you think could be causing this? Oftentimes in civilizations, when you see injustices, you see essentially certain people getting away with crimes or something, and the law enforcement isn't doing anything about it, that is when you actually have acts of vigilantism. Essentially, you have people deciding, I'm going to go out and I'm going to take the law into my own hands. And that's usually not a good idea. In most cases, it's not, because it's usually people acting in revenge or in a very spiteful manner. And oftentimes it's not just at the end of the day. But what we might be seeing here is we might be seeing the essentially the consequences of the LGBTQ community not making a clear enough divider or separation from some of the drag queen groups that are trying to normalize exposing children to a sexualized lifestyle, right? We've seen over and over again these videos coming out there on the news, in general on the internet, where you see drag queens dressed in thong or with their boobs out, dancing and gyrating in front of children in these drag show type settings, which has appalled many people across the country, right? So we have to ask ourselves, is this, the LGBTQ community wanting to be so inclusive? Are they actually only putting a bigger target on their own backs by not creating a separate enough distinction between we're not for that. We don't agree with that. We reject that, right? We reject anyone trying to bring children into that type of a setting. And so it's kind of like this. Do you remember the story that happened in France where some Parisian cartoonists thought it might be funny to draw a depiction of Muhammad, right? They drew pictures of Jesus, they drew pictures of other figures, and that was okay because those cultures believe that to be okay, right? There are many cultures out there that believe, okay, it's fine to kind of show the image of the person who we value, right? Jesus Christ. Like, we see pictures of Jesus everywhere and we don't think anything of it. In fact, we like that. We embrace that. But in the Muslim culture, if you were to draw or show the picture of Muhammad or say this is the face of Muhammad towards something, they would be highly offended, and the Islamic extremists out there would probably attack you. And that is exactly what happened at that Parisian comic store, where literally some Islamic extremists went in there and shot them all and lit them all up. Okay. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what am I doing that might be putting a target on my back? Does it mean that those Parisians have a right to go, those terrorists have a right to go shoot up the cartoonists? No, but it's called situational awareness. Okay. And so I do wonder if that's playing into it. But then again, like I said, we still do not know the motives of this suspect. A lot of it right now that we're hearing out there on the media is just purely speculation. But what we do know is that this is a prime example that red flag gun laws don't work and they don't stop mass shootings. Case in point, okay? They don't stop mass shootings. And especially when you have Democrat cities that don't actually prosecute people, don't charge people when they should be charged, then, how good are those gun laws really going to work if you're not charging people, if you're not doing anything, So anyway, all right, so let's move on to another story here. Let's go to Arizona. And we know how many pro-Kari Lake groups out there right now have been really upset about the Arizona election because of all of the bizarre situations that happen with these election machines, these electronic ballot machines that just so happen to shut down on election day, right? The day when you would need those machines to work, they stopped working. And you had people lined up, and they were saying it was like a 3-hour wait in some counties just to vote, which deterred many voters. And when people did vote, apparently they were essentially casting a ballot that went into a special box, and then that box was taken to some other area where then it was counted, right? So it created a lot of appearance of impropriety, and so people are really upset. We don't know exactly what was happening, right? But I think we kind of do. I'm just saying. But what I will say is this. What I will say is that now that we have the Republicans have the House, the best bet, I mean, we see people talking about, let's go protest on the streets in Arizona. I mean, we've been hearing that a lot. We've been hearing groups saying, let's go out there on the street in Arizona. Now, I would caution you against that only because we saw what happened with January 6th. We clearly know what we're up against. Okay, we know the tactics right now where you have the FBI infiltrating many of the right-wing groups out there and trying to essentially send infiltrators or agitators out. So it's like you could create a well-meaning peaceful protest only for them to then send some knuckleheads out there to essentially give your whole entire protest and want to do a really bad name and bad rap. And we know that right now the FBI is frothing at the mouth. They want so badly to be able to have a right-wing extremism problem in America so that they can justify surveilling and spying on all of us based on our social media activity and things we say and our opinions, right? So, we need to be careful that we don't just hand ourselves over to them on a silver platter because we know we're not extremists. We know the truth, but the general population that just laps up everything they see on the mainstream television, they will just believe it. And many of them are so hyped up against, just this red team, blue team ideology that they will do anything. They want their team to win, right? So we have to be careful. Like I said, we don't walk into another setup, another J6 situation. So take that in mind. I believe that, if we look at the patterns here leading up to January 6th, we saw, groups talking about let's protest, let's go down there to the Capitol, let's protest, right? Simultaneously, we saw people taking action. We saw our representatives, many of our Republican representatives were saying they were not going to put the slates forward, that they were demanding to have these break-off sessions, essentially, where they were going to investigate the allegations of election fraud. They were going to hear from the witnesses. This is key, okay? Because, look, I really don't like Mike Pence, and I know many of you guys don't like Mike Pence either, but what Mike Pence had done on January 6th was when he went up there, the first statements he made, he actually broke off the House and Senate to then reconvene in separate chambers. So that was opening the gate, right? Although Mike Pence did say, I can't try to change the election results, right? Which is true, and to some degree, right? But he opened the door for there to be those separate hearings. Problem is, just right before they could reconvene in the House and the Senate to have those separate hearings where they were supposed to be able to present the witness testimony, the evidence, okay? And that was going to happen over a 10-day period. Rudy Giuliani stated that out clearly in his speech on January 6th, that it was going to happen over a 10-day period. But instead, right on time, these agitator groups stormed into the Capitol. Now we're finding FBI's hands all over this thing, right? To shut the whole thing down. And then to switch the entire narrative around about extremism, Trump's extremist, insurrection, the talking points. And it gave the rhinos the moral justification to turn their back on Trump and on their own constituents. But it also intimidated many of the Republicans that had initially wanted to support Trump and wanted to get to the bottom of the election, and they all just about faced. They all just got really scared really fast and flipped around and just said, okay, we're dropping the whole thing. We're voting for Biden. So this is something we have to take into consideration. During that time period, we also had a lot more, they were doing censorship, they were doing bannings, but we actually had a lot more freedom to talk about the election on social media and on specifically places like Twitter. Now, what are we seeing? We're seeing Elon Musk taking control of Twitter. All right. I'm not entirely sure how the establishment feels about that, or if this is some kind of a weird thing where it's like one of those things where it's like, is the establishment getting ready to go after Elon for this, or is Elon part of it? We don't know. But what I do see happening is a pattern where Elon is opening up to having more people back on Twitter that were previously banned. So he reinstated Trump's account, reinstated Ye's account, and reinstated a bunch of other people's accounts. Not everyone, right? He said some people he's not letting back on, but he's reinstated some people. And so we're seeing a lot more people like, yay, I can talk about the election now. I can talk more freely now. So we're seeing a lot of activity of people talking about the election. What we're also seeing is groups planning protests in Arizona, right? They want to have a big protest in Arizona in protest of Kari Lake having the election stolen. That's their what they're saying. So my concern therein is Republicans finally have the House. We know that they're already kicking off a Hunter Biden investigation into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. We know that the establishment does not like that. But what they really don't like and what they really don't want to happen is an investigation into election fraud and into the machines and hearing all this testimony that got covered up because of the J6 storming of the Capitol event. So what we should be doing is we should be, instead of going and just standing in the streets where we could be easily infiltrated by the FBI, we should be calling our representatives. We should be making loud statements, loud and clear online, but also everyone should be calling their representatives and saying, look, we're watching you. We are your constituents. We voted for you. This is your last chance. You need to do right by the American people. You need to investigate these things. Otherwise, you will not have our vote next election, period. Right? So we need to be laying on the pressure on our representatives, but we also need to be careful and not be walking into any other traps, because the last thing I want to see happen is people going out there, getting into these street protests. They then, how easily they send their agitators, they send their provocateur groups to go do something violent, criminal, or who knows, take over a building or burn something. I don't know, right? But they then could use that as the justification. They see, this is why, Elon, you shouldn't have let all these people back onto Twitter, ban them all. In fact, the government's now going to pressure social media companies even more to censor. And then that gives the justification to these rhinos, some of them in the House, right? To say, see, this is why we don't need to be entertaining any of these claims of election fraud or elections. Let's just, anyone that does say this, they're probably a terrorist, right? So let's not walk into that trap. Let's not walk into the trap. Let's stay into, you want to really, have your representatives hear you loud and clear. Give them a bunch of homework. File a bunch of FOIA requests, file lawsuits, give them paperwork. That's what's gonna, because who wants a bunch of homework? All right. I mean, they say release the Kraken. No, let's release the Karen. All right. Let's give them a bunch of homework. Let's call them up. Let's keep them busy. Let's make them work. Say, look, you want us to work, so why don't you work? It's time for you people to do your job. All right. That's what we need to be doing. All right. Well, I mean, I hope you guys can understand, after everything I've seen, why I feel this way, why I feel strongly about this way. But just from me being there on the ground, watching what they did with Charlottesville, watching how the whole thing was literally, I called it out at the time, it was a deep state operation, watching how they had the police all stand down, okay? And now watching with January 6th, how Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell didn't have the National Guard there. They left the thing wide open and vulnerable, despite the surrounding DC metropolitan area calling in the National Guard. For some reason, they didn't want the National Guard there, but they had them all sitting there on standby. And then the second J6 went down the way it did, it was an absolute police state. Okay? They had all those police there so fast, it was insane, and it was extremely tyrannical. I mean, they had them marching in the streets. They had the 100 police vehicles showing up for just a little crowd of 20 people standing outside smoking cigarettes outside of their hotels. Okay, the police were there. The power structure was there. They let it happen. You think you think it would have happened if they really didn't want it to happen? Okay. We're living in a country right now where all of our devices are little mini tracker surveillance devices. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode of the Millennial Millie Show. And stay tuned, guys, for the next episode next Tuesday. I'm Millie Weaver, signing off.